what have you learned in the past 10, 12 years from doing your show?
One of the things that surprised me, I just thought of this when you asked the question, that I was completely mistaken about YouTube. I thought I was going to be building basically a reference library so that each video I put out there would eventually get more and more views over time because people would be coming back to it in reference. But what I found is there's about a 3-day window you have to get people's attention because they're on to the next thing and the next thing.
Well, so, recency.
Yeah, recency is absolutely, that was a big surprise.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are watching the Financial Survival Network. I am here at Rick Rule Symposium in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida. I'm sitting next to my good friend Dunnegan Kaiser. We go way back in this journey. We've kind of had parallel journeys, but going along the same path. And here we are. We're hanging out, observing what's going on here. Your YouTube channel. Tell us your YouTube channel.
Oh, Liberty and Finance.
Liberty and Finance, must watch. And hey, Dunnegan, we kind of I started out in this 12 years ago now, and you started out shortly thereafter. What have you learned in the past 10, 12 years from doing your show?
One of the things that surprised me, I just thought of this when you asked the question, that I was completely mistaken about YouTube. I thought I was going to be building basically a reference library so that each video I put out there would eventually get more and more views over time because people would be coming back to it in reference. But what I found is there's about a 3-day window you have to get people's attention because they're on to the next thing and the next thing.
Well, recency.
Yeah, recency is absolutely, that was a big surprise, one thing that I learned. What pushed us to go instead of from 1 to 2 to 3 interviews per week to now typically 6, and now with the conference shoot we're doing multiple per day as well. Or when things kind of break open in the geopolitical sphere or whatever, when we always have to do multiple per day. And moving forward, we started out audio only. I think you were starting out that way as well. Then we went to video. Now we're doing live stream. So those are changes that have come along the way as well. I guess another thing that makes me think about is I always knew, but I think I finally convinced my audience that what I'm bringing to this is I'm being their representative here. I'm asking the questions of the guests because I'm frankly quite curious at what the guest has to say. I want to pick the guest's brain on behalf of all of my viewers and myself. So I'm learning as much, I promise you, I'm learning as much as anyone from the guests we have on. So rather than being like the source of information, that's where I was really had that wrong in my head originally. I was thinking I would make a list of, okay, well, I know this and I know that. I know about engineering and I know about some things. But I didn't have to be, well, that was one of the things that came to me, is I don't have to be the expert about these things. I just have to be able to ask coherent questions that a reasonable person might wonder. And then that's another thing that came out along the way, is it's been very frustrating and bewildering and angering over the last 3 years that we're not being permitted to ask some very reasonable questions that the ordinary person should want to know, does want to know, needs to know. And we're being told, thou shalt not ask that. These are the names that may not be named. These are the questions that may not be asked, or else community strikes or deplatforming or whatever, you're going to get canceled. That has been I didn't see that one coming at all. It's been a big thorn. And we're trying to find ways around it. I have some guests that are amazingly adept at using metaphors or different words or hand gestures to
the global health issue.
Yes, or things like that.
We're not supposed to talk about.
Yes, things like that. And so it helps to have a broader vocabulary. The more you can expand your vocabulary, the more you can escape the censors, filters. But that was something I didn't see coming.
Just think of it as like when your kids were young and you wanted
to
not understand something. My grandparents would speak Yiddish.
Yes.
So unfortunately, Yiddish is a dead language now. But maybe you use Pig Latin instead, so the algorithm can't pick it up.
Well, and that becomes one of the things that then you really start processing what that means. And one of the things that really is upsetting right down to the core of my heart is, wait a minute. The purpose of our channel is about awareness and preparedness for the good of individual families so they can take care of their family and they can take care of their neighbors. And it's like, that is a good thing. So why are we being treated? In other words, why is there a power structure that's set up to make sure that we don't do that? And it's like, what does that tell you about the power structure if it's against the better interests of the people? So those were some surprises that came along the way.
Yeah, it was a shocker to me too. You know, with a legal background, believing in the First Amendment, I just assumed 225 years it was universally accepted, adhered to, and defended. And what a shocker! It's none of those things. In fact, it's under attack, and I don't know what can really stop it. We had a lawsuit. I don't know if you caught that lawsuit by Judge Dowdy, where he barred government agencies other than for intelligence purposes and criminal purposes from censoring talking to the social media platforms.
I think we had you on shortly after that came out because you said then they were trying to apply it to school board meetings and that sort of thing. It was just crazy, the misapplication right away.
Yeah. So, well, this law, this judge threatened to roll it all back. Right now, his decision stayed by the Fifth Circuit, but it's going to go to the Supreme Court. The one thing, I don't know about you, that I found disappointing with all the turmoil we've had over the past several years is the inability or the lack of desire of the courts to do anything.
Yeah, we've had constitutional attorney Dr. Edwin Vieira on, and he goes through branch by branch of the government, showing how there's been absolute dereliction of duty, not just by the executive branch to not enforce the law of the land, which is the First Amendment, Second Amendment, et cetera, but also the courts just kicking the ball, just punt, just pass, just hot potato, and he says in his viewpoint, after he's studied these cases that they've rejected, said we're not even going to examine the evidence, we're not even going to look at them, is anything that's too impactful, anything that's too hot of a potato. Oh, well, if the president really isn't the president because he wasn't eligible, or oh, well, if these appointees never could have gotten, or if that election had, oh boy, how would we unwind that? Well, that's too big of a mess. We're not going to open that can of worms. So the criteria appears to be that which would cause too much turmoil is too hot to touch, and he says that has no basis in law to say that you can't examine things that may be true. In fact, you don't even look at the evidence, which you're required to look at. If they were true, then it would be impactful. Then it would be within your scope. So the Supreme Court, in particular, has punted on numerous things that they should have at least examined the evidence.
Yeah, and they come up with grounds not to do it. The only constitutional right that they've advanced over the past 10, 20 years is the Second Amendment. All the other amendments seem to be on the back shelf.
Well, it's kind of interesting how this is interesting because when we had the Obama presidency, people were all buying weapons thinking that they're going to need to protect themselves against a government overreach and that sort of thing. And then when Trump came in, they called it the Trump slump in the firearms industry because ammo became readily available, weapons, some weapon makers went out of business.
Yeah, they went bankrupt.
Long-standing ones, right? And then now again we're back off to the races again, and people feeling, oh yikes, I better be able to protect my hearth and home. And they're right, we should be able to protect our hearth and home. Frankly, that gets back to, and we've had again, Dr. Vieira is also an expert on the Second Amendment, and we've had him on talking about people completely misunderstand, and it's a shame that it's not just about hunting rights, and it's not just about self-defense. It's about being able to stand up to tyranny. And so therefore anyone says, oh, well, we shouldn't have anyone having military-style weapons. He said, that's exactly the style of weapons you were required to have in all of the states' constitutions at the time the Second Amendment was written, so that you could repel threats, foreign and domestic.
All right, well, I'm going to go out and buy a rocket-propelled grenade launcher.
And a tank while you're at it.
Yeah,
and
an armored personnel carrier, or I'll just get the new Tesla Cybertruck. That should cover all the bases. But so freedom's under assault, and so effectively they said you know, when it gets bad enough, you still got your Second Amendment rights. Go use them. They've just punted on everything. You ever lose hope for the future? I mean, you've got a lot of kids, grandchildren.
We do, and I wouldn't say I completely lose hope, no. I would say I confess that I am guilty of what I think a lot of us are, and that is just trying not to dwell too much on the gravity of the situation we face, because it can be overwhelming. And if you do get overwhelmed, then you become kind of paralyzed, and it's not helpful. So there's a couple ways around that. One is to believe that this is not the end of the story. There's a bigger picture, and frankly, there's a bigger authority here than these earthly princes that like to push people around. They are not the ultimate authority. And so having faith in a higher authority, and believing that this is not the end of the story, there will be justice, it will come, is one thing. But the other thing is just taking small practical steps. I remember when we had 3 children under 3 at one point, and my whole world of trying to be Mr. Joe Professional in my trench coat and briefcase going out to the office, I was completely stressed out until I kind of turned my life around and realized I'm going to make building our home and our family my number one focus. In other words, bloom where you're planted. Do what you can do in a local thing. That's why, we're given the opportunity where we are in time and in space, and with the resources and the innate abilities and the friends and the connections. And I was just talking to you before we got started about how your influence affected a trajectory of my son's ability to get into podcasting. That got me into it, and so on. That's opened up other doors for our family. So you never know what opportunities, what possibilities lie just beyond that next, starting that next new thing, or trying and branching out in that new way, reaching out to a new person. So I'm a firm believer that it's not hopeless. And frankly, I have a favorite saint of mine, Saint Padre Pio, and one of his favorite famous sayings is pray, hope, and don't worry. Because when we fall into the pit of worry, it's very non-productive. It disables our abilities. We've had Navy SEALs on our show talking about when you're in an attack situation, defending hearth and home or whatever, your adrenaline goes up so high you cannot think clearly. You can't. Your memory shuts down. All these things happen because your body and your mind is totally just focused on the threat at hand. And in some ways, if you assume that your preparedness is dependent on all these plans you had kind of thought you had made, or tools you have to get at or unlock or whatever to be able to repel this threat, that's not going to be there for you. You can't count on thinking well at a time of great stress. So you can either train under stress situations until you get to where you can still function in that situation, which is one option. That's what the Navy SEALs do. Or you could, as an alternative to that, make things so simple and get them so close so they're not undoable for you, even though these things seem too big for us to affect. And I also trust in getting the word out. We were talking about freedom of speech just a moment ago. By getting the word out, so I have one voice, but when we have 90,000 subscribers on YouTube, and then people retweet and repost our stuff, you're reaching untold numbers of people and igniting sparks in their mind. And that's how humans have always shared ideas, and an idea is a very powerful thing.
Very true. Yeah.
That's why they're trying to get us not to say these things.
Well, so like when you're talking about Navy SEALs, airline pilots, they don't practice flying at cruising altitude and everything is perfect.
Yeah.
What happens when you lose an engine? What happens when you lose both? What if something goes wrong? What if we lose electric? They train emergency situations, and when you listen to the FAA black box, the recording of the pilot communicating with the tower, they're never panicking. They're always
problem solving,
seemingly in control, trying to solve the problem at hand. May not work out, but that's exactly it. And the thing is, so manipulation in media, they're always trying to knock you out of your rational state into your irrational, emotional state of fear and worry and doubt and all of that. So, when the pandemic hit, I just said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to live my best life, and I'm just not going to pay any attention to them. And I'll tell you, I had the best year.
That was a good
One
call.
of the best years I ever had. I happened to get COVID. I was in the hospital. It was bad for a couple of days, 6 days in the hospital. But with the exception of that 3-week illness, and then after COVID, I lost all this weight, in better shape than I ever was before for the past 30 years. So, it's hard though to filter it out though, isn't it?
Well, it
Really
is.
hard.
It depends. And my wife reminds me of that because given the preparedness focus of our channel, I tend to be exposed to and seeking out feeds of information that tell me where there's a problem so that we can talk about it because it may be something people need to be aware of so they can be prepared. That habit of seeking out information about where there needs to be a problem can be a pit because if you stay in that mindset all the time, you're not smelling the roses, you're not appreciating the sunsets and that sort of thing. So we're challenging each other. It's our new thing, and we're doing pretty well at it, I think, of really stopping and watching the rainbows and noticing when the osprey's going on it to go catch that fish out of the pond and things like that. Just the wonders of our grandkids and the treasure of a family and a marriage and that sort of thing is something that we're trying to take the time to stop and appreciate, and it really makes a difference. And exercise, being active.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, there's no purpose, it's not productive. It's like you swat a ball around the racket, the pickleball court well, I don't know, we feel a lot better after we do that.
Hey.
So
One thing, scientists have a lot of wrong stuff, a lot of stuff with food, nutrition, but the one thing that every doctor and every scientist out there agrees on is you should be exercising and doing whatever you are physically able to do on a regular basis. Because not only will you be healthier in the present, but when you get to my advanced age, you'll be healthier then as well.
right, and keeping your bone mass up and keeping your muscle mass up and stuff like that.
So important.
Yeah.
Hey.
My wife always reminds me when we have the opportunity to take the elevator, she says, well, should we take the stairs instead? And she's a really great one about that. Should we walk longer than we did yesterday because we didn't get our walks in yesterday? That kind of thing. So it's a good reminder.
Accountability partner, that's key to a
Yeah.
successful marriage. Hey, so I'm going to ask you something a little off key here, a little oddball, but we've had a lot of talk about UFOs or whatever they call them now, AFPs or something like that. And, and you wonder, is it a PSYOP? A PSYOP, if you're not aware, is an operation that is geared to control people psychologically. CIA is a master of it. As an extraterrestrial thing, the UFOs, is this a PSYOP or is it real? Because when you talked about before of being something else above us, certainly if you can travel interstellarly between whatever planet they're at, potentially billions of light years away, they can get here instantaneously. They're obviously way ahead of us. What's your take on this whole discussion here?
I don't know that I'll be able to speak intelligently to that subject. I would just say that I have a scientific training background, and that predisposes me to. I mean, I like what Galileo said. He said the book of nature is open to all who would read it, and the language is written in as mathematics. So I studied a lot of math and I studied a lot of science, and that's why I've been really ticked off the last 3 years as what's being mislabeled as science. It's really just indoctrination or just trying to
Corruption.
Corruption, sure. Trying to push a narrative, propaganda, and then just slapping the label science on it, as though that's going to shut down conversation about it as a conversation stopper. So I don't know the answer. When I was speaking of a higher authority, I was speaking of a higher power being God.
Sure, I understand.
But that's fine. But so I don't actually know the answer. But I guess any legitimate scientist would say, let's find out what we know and let's be open to that, rather than predisposed saying, I know the answer before I even examine the evidence.
So, yeah, well, it's just interesting because certainly War of the Worlds, Orson Welles, that whole radio thing, he said 5 times that it was fake, but people
were jumping off bridges and
they were like, hey, we're getting invaded by extraterrestrials.
Because they trusted whatever came across the wires. And that's something that's, you mentioned how we've been inundated with fear and worry as a means of controlling. People did and the governments of the world and the people of the world did an astonishing job of lockstep, other than the few oddballs like you that decided to go on with their life, over the past 3 years. And you've got to ask yourself, have a healthy, as you said, a healthy skepticism, not just towards government, but towards what you hear on the main media as well. So it can be bewildering. As an ordinary person, how are you supposed to separate the lies from the truth? And you can always do a gut check. You can check from different angles. I would say definitely don't just take one source as your only source. Trying to weigh questions like that.
I couldn't agree more. I just find the whole thing fascinating. When I was like 11 years old, I was in the backyard, and there had been a whole bunch of UFO sightings in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And I'm in the backyard, and I look up, and I see this thing. It's a spherical object, but it looked like it was a rock. But it's got like red lights flashing and blue lights and green lights, and it leaves a trail of steam behind it. I mean, it almost sounded like a hissing sound, and it just went on its path, and the media said that it was a meteor and it crashed. Well, I don't know where they got all those lights from.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it was an ET or a UFO. I'm just saying that their explanation was never satisfactory.
Not sufficient to what you had observed. Yeah, our children observed something that I couldn't explain or understand over when they were young, and all three of them had the same rendition of that. Not very different from what you described. So yeah, it's worthy of curiosity. It's worthy of inspection. So I don't have the answer for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, but we're always thinking and open to possibilities. I think maybe that's what we both kind of specialize in, is like, you think you know one thing. How many times do you find out you think you knew something and you were wrong?
Well, yeah. So even in my engineering career, I was responsible for like designing and specifying very complex, expensive equipment. And when it would finally, and designing and doing the drawings and sending it off for fabrication, when it would arrive, rather than just going, oh, look, it showed up, I'll check it off on the box, I would crawl all over the equipment, measuring all the dimensions and everything like that. So that old thing about trust and verify, it absolutely applies. Yes, it's a good idea to look at where are the weaknesses in my plan, where haven't I checked. My wife reminds me of this all the time. It's like, well, why didn't you check that? It's like, because I got tired of checking everything. And then you finally get bit, but at the time you don't. So anyway, it's a good idea to verify information and from multiple sources. That's another thing that really stinks about the oppressive environment we're finding ourselves in, where there's only one acceptable narrative and you can't deviate from it. It's like, says who? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, that's anti-science.
It's unscientific. It's anti-science. Yeah.
Science is, challenge. Science is all about replication, replicating results, and blowing through theories that no longer serve.
Right. If you have new evidence that shows that wasn't a valid theory, then you get smarter and you move on.
Yeah, but now settled science seems to be, science is anything but settled.
Yeah, right.
Einstein.
By its nature.
They're still saying, he was mostly right, but there's a few areas he wasn't right, and they're working on them. So, all right, well, hey, tell us where we find you, how we connect with you.
The easiest place is just go to youtube.com/reluctantpreppers. You'll find our channel there with 90,000 plus kindred souls ready to chat with you. We do live chats with all of our videos Monday through Saturday, so 6 times a week, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and you'll see a very lively community there, and people will be able to take in all the wide variety of guests we have from many different subject areas, all on the theme of liberty and finance. And also we are on Brighteon, Rumble, SoundCloud, and lots of other venues you'll find listed in the description. All of our social media links are listed in the description of every one of our videos, and we post on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and others. So liberty and finance, and you can email us too at libertyandfinance@gmail.com.
All right, hey Dunnegan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's a joy. Thank you.
All right, so just shoot it to you Dropbox it to me, or?
Yeah, let's see what the best way is. Hold on. What I can do is we have a Google Drive and I can share it with you that way.
Yeah, well, however you cloud it.
Save this. Why is it not letting me save it? There we go. Oh, because I didn't stop it yet. Maybe I should stop